Government of Nashville and Davidson County Community Oversight Board may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law judicial writ. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by this board. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. We have established a quorum of the board, and now I'd like to request of any board member if there are any additions or modifications to the agenda, already having noted an additional new business item by board member Nguyen. Are there any modifications? I'd like to take privilege and to request that we move item 10, the proposed resolution reports, up to item number 7. I'm sorry, up to item that would be the item directly after the executive director's report. Let's call it 7A. If there is no objection, is there any objection? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adopt the agenda as modified?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any objection, any readiness? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Now is the time for public comments. If we have members of the public who are present and who wish to make a statement, you now have that opportunity to do so. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to comment? Is there anyone from the public who wishes to address the board? Hearing none. The next item on the agenda is the chair's remark. I will waive the reading but reserve the right. The next item on the agenda will be the executive director's report. Director Fisher.
All right, good afternoon.
I'm sorry, Director Fisher, I'm jumping the gun. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I apologize for that. Let's get to the approval of the minutes, shall we?
Oh, we skipped it, okay.
Yeah.
I'm particularly fond of those, so go ahead.
The minutes were distributed along with the board packet. If there's any comments, requests for modifications, now's the time. The floor is open.
I do have one correction, sorry.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, discussion?
There was just a small name for the Trulio. It's not spelled T-R-U-L-I-O, it's T-R-U-L-E-O. It's on the second page under the under number 5. It's the second to the last paragraph there. So we'll just change the spelling from T-R-U-L-I-O to L-E-O.
All righty. Mr. Secretary? Well, I have...
Second again.
Thank you. I have further discussion on that. All right. If we could, and I know we're doing a bang-up job with these minutes as a volunteer organization, but under call to order, under others in attendance, can we add Commander Carlos Laura?
He's on there.
Oh, there was. I'm sorry, I didn't see those. So did we catch that under number 4, chair's remarks? Number 4, chair's remark. It says Arnold Hayes. Okay. Maybe drop that line. Okay, well, okay, I'll just coordinate with you to make sure that everything. Thank you. Now to the executive director's report. Director Fisher.
Sure, thank you. I'm going to kind of make this some of this stuff we have already discussed, but I'm going to start with the personnel update. So the MNCO hired 2 new employees who will begin working with the COB on Monday, October 31st. We welcome a senior social worker, Simone Cow, and an investigator, Ms. Angela Williams, to the MNCO team. We'll also begin the search for an assistant director, an investigator, an additional investigator, and we have 2 research positions that have all been put on a register. So we have the candidates, and we just need to set dates and go through the process. So hopefully we will have all of those positions filled before, hopefully November is ambitious for me, but we would have that done, most definitely all of those positions filled before December 31st. We had 2 MOU committee meetings to discuss the new MOU that we are proposing to the police department. We met on Thursday, October the 6th, and Friday, October the 14th. All members were present for that discussion, and the next step is to meet with the police department, the mayor's office, and Metro Legal. And that is from my understanding, what I sent to, after getting all of your information and dates and availability, I sent that to Mr. Bunton, and so that schedule would be the Wednesday, the 9th is the proposed date, so at 10 a.m. So I haven't heard back from him. The police department did respond and say that they could not make the 8th. So the next date was the 9th, so Wednesday, the 9th at 10 a.m. Is what I have proposed to John Bunton. So once we hear back, we'll confirm that, and then we will decide whether you all want to have another meeting before that time, a quick meeting. We could probably do that in our office. I'm not really sure how that works. I attended and sent you all an opportunity to join in on NACO's training, which is called Evidence-Based Policing. That was on Tuesday, October the 11th. I've had multiple meetings, not as many as I normally have, thank goodness. So we have a department heads meeting tomorrow. I met with the Metro Law Director, Wally Dietz, today. And I also attended the Community of Practice convening that was hosted by Andrea Blackman. She's the Director of Metro's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. That was a 3-hour training. It was really good. We've been really busy with outreach in the communities, trying to make certain that people are aware of the services that we offer for the COB. So myself and our community liaison, Ms. Robinson, attended IMF's Wednesday meeting. They have a weekly meeting. We attended that this month. We met with representatives from the Old Hickory Business Chamber. They were really interested in hearing about the COB, so we went out to Old Hickory to talk to them. It was good information to share with them. I was a guest speaker for the National Action Network's youth event, which was called Kids in Conversations. It was really good to hear what children and young adults had to say about policing in our city. We're hosting a high school intern, Micah Strickland. He's been working really closely with our community liaison. They've been working on a continued outreach plan to really address our really unique communities that haven't really been able to either attend our meetings or know what we have to offer. We're also looking into getting some language access opportunities. We would have to really contract with the language line so that when we are in different communities, we want to make certain that we have a translator available for that. I am myself alongside in support of NAN. They want to host a community workshop and town hall meeting. They have asked us to join in with that, and I have agreed to that. That is going to be held on Saturday, November the 12th at 10 a.m. And the theme is police oversight and the power of community participation in the process. The meeting will be held at the historic J. Alexander Luby Center, and guest panelists will be announced soon. We're waiting to get confirmation from a few more people before I announce who the guests are. So that would be Saturday, November 12th at 10 a.m. I hope that everyone can come out. It's going to be really exciting. We have just 2 more meetings this year. This year has passed by really quickly. The first one is November the 21st. The next one, I'm sorry, is November the 21st. It's going to be at the Sunny West building where we usually have it over at the Howard Office Building, and then December the 19th. So those are our two meetings, and we had to take into account for the holiday. And so those were the only dates that they had available in November. It was November and December, the dates were taken up, so that is that. I did want to mention that we had a hard time trying to schedule a special call meeting because there just wasn't any availability because of early voting and all these things. So a lot of the buildings were not available. So I was able to secure a date for November the 15th if we need to have a special call meeting. So that meeting at this point is, the date in the room is available. It would be at the Sunny West Building on November the 15th, if we need it. So we would have to check with Mr. Yoon to see, Attorney Yoon, to see how many cases that he will be able to get resolved and ready to go. Because we have a meeting the next week, so we have November the 15th, and then the next Tuesday is our board meeting. I'm sorry, the next Monday is our board meeting. So it may not make sense to have a special call meeting if we can do all of our proposed resolution reports at our board meeting, but we will determine that once we figure out how many cases that he can get through. So I'll keep you posted on that, but we do have a date reserved for that. Our research analyst, our lead analyst he's been very busy this month. He's attended multiple trainings and webinars related to research and public safety. One of the things that I'll highlight is he applied for the University of Pennsylvania's FAILS project proposal, and they have accepted our proposal. I think they've accepted it. And so it's in relation to doing some research on calls for service. And so I'll give you more information once we get some more concrete information on how that's going to look. Yeah, and so he's been continuing to work on the COB policy advisory reports as well as the use of force reports and all those. And he's been doing that work pretty much alone. And so hopefully we can get him some help as quickly as possible. What else do we have? All right, so we move on down to our investigations. The investigations team received 3 new investigative complaints since the last board meeting in September. We also have received a total of about 18 non-complaint contact calls for service and issued 7 dispositions related to MMPD misconduct in October. You all should have received those dispositions from the chief of police that I sent to you earlier this month. If you want to talk about those, that we can as well. The MNCO investigator submitted 7 requests for records, reported no issues receiving any type of information. Myself and Mr. Crowell Williamson I've been doing this now for about a year, where we have been sharing information with recruit sessions of the training academy. So we shared with recruit session 97 on October the 18th and session number 98 on October the 14th. And it's about an hour-long presentation. So we've been doing that, and they're going really well. I already talked about the MOU committee meeting. Also, I did want to just continue to say this every time we talk because I think it's still important, and that is that we need to secure MOUs with Vanderbilt and the the Park Police Departments, because both of those agencies fall under the authority of the police department and the chief. There's a force review board hearing. It's scheduled for October the 27th. Which is tomorrow at Midtown Hills, and there's another one scheduled for Thursday, November the 3rd. So those will be 2 use of force hearings that I will be in attendance. I continue to reach out to JIS regarding changing platforms because one of the things that's important is that we have a case management system that supports the work that we're doing. And right now, what we have is antiquated. We can't run reports. Our research analyst spends a lot of time trying to create reports that could be easily generated if we had a current and an up-to-date case management system. And I've already identified that case management system. I told you that was called Civil Technologies. And we have been in conversation with JIS, in conversation with Metro ITS, as well as with Civil Technologies. And it's the same thing. We have to, Metro ITS said they could not really host that and build that out for us. So the only alternative we have is JIS. And so I haven't heard back from them as of yet regarding whether or not they are going to allow us to switch platforms to the justice integration systems. But what it does, without having a new case management system, we are at a deficit in the work that we do. Most departments, I mean, Civil has moved on to multiple cities across the country. Charlottesville, Virginia was the latest, and we're just behind in that ability to do more than what we're doing now. The reports that we have now, really, he's self-creating those. We should have a system that you can hit a button and it spits out what you need. Investigators should be able to keep up with their own time tracking as well. So we are working towards having that in trying to secure that. I'm gonna go ahead and start the procurement process regardless of whether or not we are, whatever platform we're on, because we need to move forward on that. It's been almost, at least eight months, I think almost a year now that we have been talking about it, but having no action behind it. So that is.
Director Fisher?
Yes.
Just a point of privilege. Can we turn that off for right now? It's like
Oh,
right
yeah.
in my eyes.
Sure,
All right. Thank you. Please continue.
no problem. So I'm waiting for that response. I'll keep you posted on that. I also have reached out to the director of property for Metro related to my request in us moving from the current location. Once we hire the 2 people that will come on October the 31st, we will be at full capacity in our office. There isn't any availability for expansion in our office. So we're supposed to have a total, right now we have 10 spaces. We're hiring 12 people. With the 2 people that's added, that will give us 10, but we're hiring a total of 15. We'll have a total of 15. So we're hiring a total of 5. And so what that means is I'm going to have to really work hard to figure out a schedule where some are going to be in the office, some will be working remotely. But I am a little hesitant for new people to start working remotely right away. They need to get acclimated to the office. And so I am going to continue asking Metro's property director to look for us an additional space, alternative space. And so they have sent emails. We have exchanged emails back and forth because there's other departments that also want to move. But at this point, we definitely need another location. We have just outgrown this space. As well as, so in closing out this report, we wanted to welcome our newest board member, Ms. Alicia Haddock, to the board. Thank you for serving. We appreciate you. We're glad you're here. She was nominated by Councilmember Sharon Hurd. She'll serve out the remainder of previous board chair Arnold Hayes' term. We also have 2 community nominations that will go before the City Council for elections on November the 1st. And so we did get 2 applicants, 2 nominations for that. So we'll have somebody. That'll be the 11th person. So I'm happy about that. And that will happen, like I said, November the 1st. And then, of course, we have 3 people rolling off. Their terms are expiring, and that would happen on January 31st, 2023. That would be Phyllis Hildreth, who was a mayor's nominee, Sean Witzel, which was selected from a community organization, as well as Mr. Mark Wynn. And so you all are, definitely can reapply if you want, but I just wanted to let you know and let the public know that if you don't, we will have 3 positions open January the 31st. So that concludes my October's report, and I'll take any questions.
Questions for the executive director from the board? I see Mr. Goddard.
On the issue about complaints, it ends with, said the MC MNCO issued 7 dispositions related to MNPD misconduct in October. Were those the 7 we received from the chief that you then, okay, but that's what I thought you said, but I wasn't sure. And second, just as one board member, I would encourage you to go ahead and schedule the November 15 meeting. I have significant confidence that the legal advisor union will be able to finish some reports by then. We can always cancel if they're not ready, but if they get ready and we haven't scheduled the meeting, it gets difficult to do that. And I'd sure like to get as many of those as we can done and not have them lumped on top of what may be a full agenda for the November meeting. Just my thought. Thank you.
Questions for the executive director? Well, I'd like to take a moment to offer Ms. Haddock an opportunity to give us a brief introduction.
Thank you. Thank you guys for welcoming me, and it has been, pleasure through the whole process of joining the Community Oversight Board. Your work is respected. Now our work is respected within the community, and so, and Director Fitchard really being that first point of contact and how welcoming, and Attorney Yoon, it is my hope and intention to serve this board well, but first and foremost, serve the community well. So I'm right alongside you all, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Director Fitchard, on the issue of the meeting that you had with the legal department today, I wasn't really expecting that we'd reach anything final, but anything to report, or is that maybe for the next meeting?
Yeah, we just actually talked a little bit about the legal position and where they were and how they wanted to assist in any way that they could. I think that they have some restraints in regards to what they can do for us, as well as that position wasn't necessarily just dedicated to us specifically as it was, as we initially thought. And so there was some conversation about that and how that looked and what that position looks like within their workload and workspace. There's not really any metro attorney that's dedicated to any department for a one-on-one work. They all have multiple agencies, multiple departments that they give advice and our legal advisors to.
And I certainly do appreciate the mayor's office and John Button and Mr. Dietz and yourself, for getting together and addressing this issue of how we avoid, the kind of holdup and bottleneck that results from us not having a legal assistant, okay? And that seems to still be the case, and it hampers us in our ability, but I am pleased to see that we're moving forward, and you seem to be fairly hopeful that we may reach some kind, I don't put words in your mouth, that we may be on our way to reaching some kind of solution on that.
Yeah, there was multiple, we discussed multiple ways. I discussed multiple ways with the finance department, like where do we have savings, where could we get this position? I also had that discussion with Mr. Dietz as well. And so I don't want to really speak too much more about it because we haven't really finalized anything, but it did give me opportunity to reflect on what's the best fit for our office. And how that would, how it impacts the work that we're doing as it pertains to PRs.
Appreciate it. Know that you will pursue the best option possible. Thank you for that. Congratulations, just on the side, University of Pennsylvania Fells Institute is very well known for its rigor in terms of adoptance of those types of requests. So good job on that. That's excellent. There was an issue at our last meeting, and I'm sorry, if other board members have questions, the floor is open to everyone. I'm sorry, I don't mean to just go down my list. Okay. About the 3 body-worn camera incidences that were redacted that we wanted to look further into. 2 of them we were really okay with, okay, as far as how that was resolved, but there was a 3rd outlier that we wanted to know more about in terms of how it may have affected some previous complaint or resolution that we proposed. And I'm still looking forward that, you know, if not this meeting, that maybe the next meeting, we can deal with that one outlier that we did not get a detailed understanding of just exactly what the context was. And maybe keep that on our radar, okay, with you? Unless Commander Laura has something now, okay, we'll keep it on the radar.
And I wanted to add, you know, I'm gonna butcher his name, is it Anthony, I'll call him Anthony,
Okay.
the creator, Trulio, did say that he and, I think it was the chief of Seattle would not mind, either participating in a meeting, whether it's virtually or even coming in our presence to talk about, the Trulio, equipment. They may have discussed it with, the chief, or other chiefs of police, at the conference last week. Did that happen, Commander Laura? Did they have a presentation, Trulio, at the conference? Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, so never mind, sorry.
Yeah, but that's okay, because
yeah.
it really dovetails on my next, I was
Yes.
going to ask if it was possible for this board to get a demo of some sort.
Right, so
of
they
some-
have
whether it's
agreed to
virtual or
that.
in person. I mean, that'd be great. I don't know. Would we be interested in that?
Yes. Mr. Holloway brought it up the last meeting, and so I did check in with them, and they were like,
That would be great.
yeah, they could do that. So I can get that set up for the November's meeting.
That'd be excellent. And then finally, for me, is on your report, and this may have been what Board Member Goddard was addressing, but the 45-day compliance report in terms of the chief responding to, did I get that right? Is it 45 days? Responding to our resolution proposals. Was there an update on that? Maybe I missed it. I don't know. There's no update on that?
No, I haven't gotten an update on that.
I can't
I need
recall.
to follow up on that.
Okay. Because at our last meeting, I think there were a total of, I don't recall, I'm sorry, I'm struggling
Hold on,
here.
we're gonna look. Let me
I'm
see.
struggling here. But there were several
Yes.
resolution reports that had gone to the chief in which he had 45 days to respond, and it was beyond that 45-day window. And I'm just trying to recall how big that breadbasket was. I'm sorry, can I see Director Goddard, Board Member Goddard?
If I may, several were responded to, if I understand right, Ms. Director, several of those, I assume you did contact Chief Drake, we did get responses to, and you sent those around earlier.
Yes.
Is that right? Those were
That's
some of
correct.
the group we're
I
talking about. So
misspoke.
he has
That's correct.
responded on several.
We actually
Yes.
we only have 3 that are still outstanding.
Okay, so we only have 3 that are still out.
Yeah, 2 of them with 260 days and then 1 with 27,
Okay,
so.
okay, well, that's great. Please, say, sorry.
One's just 27 days, so there are only 2 that he's late on right now.
Okay, is that, okay?
I didn't hear you, I'm sorry.
Didn't punch the button. I said the 27's not due yet.
No,
So there's
that's
only 2
correct.
that he's late on, is
That's
what the
correct.
point I was making. Okay.
Correct.
And I think that the discussion that we had last time, and I'm looking at Judge Brown because he was pivotal in that discussion, was when they are out, when the chief is outside that window and hasn't requested the procedural extension, then our obligation is to let them know that they are out of compliance. And I certainly would like to institutionalize that,
Okay.
that process, you know, rather than, waiting and trying to figure out what's going on in their organization. There is a specific timeline, and once that timeline is reached, I believe that a notice of non-compliance should go to the chief, to his office. So if we could do that, Director Fitchett, I think that takes us forward on that.
Correct. We can
Okay.
do that.
Thank you. Wow, I'm going to take one more privilege here. Before we go into the PRs, I saw a couple of other members of the community walk in, and after public comment, if you wish to address this board, you can certainly do so at this time. Is there anyone in the room that wishes to address this board under public comment? All right, hearing none, we'll move forward. A modified agenda calls now for us to deal with the 3 proposed resolution report. I'm sorry, Attorney.
Sorry, one of the complainants gave me a phone call on the way over here saying that she was gonna be late. I don't know if Stacy Hall's here, if not, sorry, we were gonna wanna wait for that one.
Okay.
So if we can take them out of order, that might be best.
Okay, on a particular PRR?
Yes, on 029,
Let me see, I got it right here. Yes, 029.
Okay, and is that individual here?
they're not.
Okay, okay, and we'll find out if that individual plans to address this board, and we'll give them opportunity to do so if they wish to, if that is within the board's pleasure.
The rules, as I understand them, and I'm looking to Advisor Yoon, they can address the board, but only after we have completed our discussion and voted. They do need to be here to hear the report and our discussion, I think.
She's on her, she just called and said she's on her way.
They wouldn't be speaking during this, but they would probably wanna be present.
Yeah,
here.
that was my understanding.
After deliberations.
We'll take them out of order.
Okay, so what would that order be?
So let's
Director
start with
Fisher?
47, 48, and then go back to 29.
Okay. All right, would you care to introduce?
Can you,
Yeah, you can do
turn
that now.
on? Yeah, you have to turn that on.
I can actually move.
So usually, and so since we're having this in the community, we didn't make copies for you, and we're not at the other office where this would introduce the PRR, if you could kind of turn to look at the introduction here. I'm gonna read it like I normally do. I'm sorry that we don't have copies for it. Did it come on? When we're doing these in the community, we kind of improvise a little bit, so.
And then 29.
Okay, there it is. You're not gonna be able to see it great, but it may, can you go to the next,
We can't compete with Mother Nature, no?
you can't do that. There's some shades here. It is beautiful out there, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, could we turn off a row of lights maybe or something? That might help.
All right, there we go. Oh, wait, is it only 47? I can, okay, there we go. All right, 47 is posted up, so I'm gonna start it. This is MNCO CC 2021-047, is a community member initiated complaint where the complainant alleged that on December 3rd, 2019, multiple MMP officers threw him to the ground, kneed and punched the complainant while handcuffed. The complainant then alleged he was arrested without justification. MNCO initiated an investigation into the actions of 3 police officers. 2 of the subject officers resigned prior to being interviewed. The third denied being present during the arrest, arriving after the complainant was already in handcuffs and either in the back seat of a police car or on the way. According to the records and interviews of the officers, Officer 1 and Officer 2 observed a car that allegedly ran a red light on Monroe Street. After unsuccessfully attempting to conduct a traffic stop, they state they believe to be the same vehicle crashed at the intersection of 10th Street and Monroe, and they claim the complainant got out of the driver's side door and run. All of the 6 officers interviewed state that Officer 1 and Officer 2 completed the arrest before they arrived on the scene. None of them observed any physical interaction nor had any interaction with the complainant. No body-worn cameras were worn at this time. A photograph of the complainant was taken at book-in, but it was only of the complainant's face. Did not show any bruising. The criminal charges against the complainant were dismissed by the district attorney's office on June 1st, 2022. Due to the lack of body-worn camera footage and the inability of 2 of the officers to be interviewed due to their resignations, there was very little in the way of corroborating and contradictory evidence. The executive director concluded that the allegations of misconduct could not be sustained by the preponderance of evidence standard.
Floor is open. Comments?
Yeah, that concludes that.
I'm sorry.
Right, so for those, it was not sustained, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
go
your
ahead.
report.
I'm done.
Comments by the board on this particular case? Mr. Goddard?
I don't have any comments on the proposed report and the proposed resolution. I think all that is fine. I am troubled and raise a question, and it may be for a later board meeting, about what we do with officers that are accused of something that is significant and just resign. We have subpoena power. If the council approves it, we could subpoena if we want to go that route. It's a lot of work, but it may be important to try to, and they just take the fifth when the time comes. And I ask Advisor Yoon, and if you know off the top of your head, fine, always, if you need to research, let me know, whether we can recommend something along the lines of a notice to that effect in the personnel file that will be there in perpetuity and be provided to anyone that asks to see the personnel file, another police force looking to hire that person, that lays out these facts. They can draw their own conclusion. I don't know if they quit because of what they were afraid would come out of this investigation, but that specter is there. Thank you.
I would say correct. We can send this recommendation as well as any other recommendations to any criminal justice agency within Metro. I also don't think there's anything precluding us from sending this report, these recommendations, these findings to other agencies. There's a national free database of sort of bad cops that can be accessed when people are doing the hiring process. It's well known that when people resign from agencies while misconduct complaints are pending, that information doesn't get sent out when people apply for jobs, and that same precinct or agency is contacted regarding, hey, is there anything on their file that we should know about? No, because it wasn't a finding of guilt. I think another thing might be to add to the letters that go out, perhaps an inference of guilt could be attached to people who do not participate in this. Obviously, that would take some thinking through, but there's options.
And I just want to add to that one of these officers resigned not because of this, but because he was indicted for a homicide case. So and had an attorney and probably wouldn't have been able to talk, doing this process is still ongoing, his criminal legal issues. So I did want to say that to you all and let you know.
Board Member Holloway.
Even though you got two people that's resigned from that incident, that doesn't wipe his hand clean. He's still liable for punitive damage, and civilly also they can go to court on him also. So if he owns property and stuff like that, he still can be, like I said, punitive damage. He's still liable. It doesn't matter whether he was employed at the time through Metro government. The action took place while he was employed. So that doesn't eliminate him from being sued, being responsible for punitive damage, because he was employed at the time.
Other members? My comments go along with what Member Goddard was mentioning. It's like, wow, these folks can just move on. But I guess I had a drill down question is, do we know if there was an OPA investigation going on at the time of the resignation? I mean, I don't think we don't, I'm sure we don't just have that answer at our fingertips, but, that would give us some indication of where the pressure may have been coming from to force them into that situation. But our investigation was ongoing at that time. Is that correct? Or had we started our investigation at that time? I just wanted to know the circumstances, and I know that we can't know everything about it, don't get me wrong.
There wasn't an investigation regarding the complainant's claim about this particular incident. They were, two of the officers, both were under investigation. I know for certain, those two that were, that resigned were under investigation. One for a homicide. I'm not really sure what the other one was for, but it was something significant as well.
So I'd like to follow up on that suggestion that we add something to the file. Is that something we can, as a board right now, say we'd like to do that? I don't know what the form of that would be. I know you came up with, Attorney Yoon gave us several options.
And that I would have to look further into, because when you make a not sustained finding, the board's recommendations to the chief are gonna be different, like, as far as what our rules state, so I will have to look at that a little bit differently. I don't, but, I have ideas, but I'm gonna need to research that.
Okay, that's fair, that's fair. I mean, because bottom line is, where's the justice for the complainant? Where's the justice? I mean, you know, this guy, you know, presumed innocent, he steps off a curb, gets punched in the face, thrown to the ground, handcuffed, kicked and punched. And then criminal charges are filed, but they're dismissed, okay? And I'm like, well, where's the justice for this person? I think that what Member Holloway was pointing out probably is the last resort for any kind of justice. But I appreciate you bringing this and the discussion that has ensued. Any other? Hearing none.
Hang on, just a second. Maybe we could resolve this. Mr. Yoon, would it be possible to make a motion to the effect that the executive director and is advised by the legal advisor are directed to either revise the PRR if permitted by law, to request and direct that a statement for you guys come up with respect to them resigning before they can be questioned and be put in the file, or that a separate letter to that effect go with the PRR? Is that too vague, or is that something you think we could move on tonight?
The part that hangs me up is when the board makes a finding as it relates to this complaint
Right.
of not sustained, it's not an unfounded complaint, which would mean that you are say that there's no evidence to
Right, it's a
support.
not
Not sustained is
51%.
simply, we didn't find 51%, but we're not saying there wasn't some, and there might be 51%, it's just it didn't get uncovered during this investigation. That being said, I don't want to handcuff us to this resolution report as the only way that we can put letters into files. I think there's actually a way that we can make recommendations and make requests and send letters without, regardless of what this complaint does. So if we want to put some language into this resolution report, even knowing there's a not sustained finding, I think we can, but I also don't want to say that there's not other ways that we could simply have a letter written by the board or by the executive director to put this in the HR file, to put this to the chief. If that makes sense.
Would it be appropriate then to move approval of this PRR, but grant the executive director the authority to withhold it until the next meeting if she believes, in light of your research, an amendment to it would be appropriate?
I think so. I was also going to suggest that, let me pull up the rules on our, and then if you'll just defer that particular piece to after the next two PRRs, I think we have our.
I didn't want to put you on the spot for that, but if you can do
It's a
that,
pretty
that would be
simple
great.
look at
Appreciate it.
our rules that are pretty black and white.
Yeah, I think that you guys are moving in the right direction. I think that we know for certain that if there's an indictment, that particular process is going to decommission that officer. But as for the other officer who resigned that also had trouble, my concern is that, you know, even though they resigned from Metro Nashville Police Department, that does not preclude them of going to another department in the state and getting a job. That was the same incident that we had with Tamar Rice many years ago. And so we want to, if we have the authority to do that, to look towards doing those types of things, to stop officers who have issues of leaving and jumping from one department to the other.
Judge Brown.
You know, one possibility might be to consider whether we could make a recommendation that our report note that the officer resigned, in effect resigned while under investigation, and due to the resignation, the board could not reach a conclusion. We used to, in the military, used to have resignation in lieu of court-martial, but it's sort of the same thing. I mean, if we didn't have an OPA recommendation, we don't really have a factual basis to make a finding of, affect guilt, but it seems like we ought to be able to have something that would get into the recommendation that his file be noted that he resigned in lieu of completing investigation or something of that nature.
Are you saying that, you could put a statement in that he resigned on an unfavorable condition?
Could say we resigned under investigation.
While on the investigation?
Yeah, that would be my thought.
Attorney Young?
It's coincidental that you brought that up because this, and it was related to a different case as well, but there is always the option that the board or the director can suspend or stay an investigation for various reasons. And I think the two things that it sort of hung on was one, balancing the very real desire of the complainant or the community to know an outcome and it's something that they had been filed so long ago, versus if this was a criminal case and somebody didn't appear for court, for example, there'd be a failure to appear, a warrant issued for their arrest, and that homicide charge would just stay out there for the next 50 years until they were picked up on that warrant. So similarly, if the need or the interest was outweighed by the other, the board could, the director could say, we're not gonna make a decision on continuing to investigate this case until that person is back before us. And the reason that would happen is if that person tried to reapply. Obviously, that's probably not practical or likely to happen. And for that reason, I think that was not why it was, that was one of the reasons why it wasn't stayed. It was instead closure for the community, for the complainant, outweighed maybe waiting for this person to come back into this force or some other, and be subject to investigation and interview again.
But we do have people who resign, not necessarily under, unfavorable conditions or in lieu of an investigation, but they resign just because their time is expired, right? And so I think I like Mr. Goddard's idea as well as institutionalizing this by using our subpoena power to have those people come in to complete the investigation process. So.
And I definitely like the idea, but I want us to take our time, and, because this is a situation, and I know, like what you just said, we want an institutional solution. And I think that we need to be deliberate about that. So, not to put anybody under pressure to come up with something at this meeting, but maybe at the next meeting, Attorney Young, you can come back with some kind and address how we might affect the kinds of inclusion of documentation in a file, and not necessarily related to this case, but in cases like this going forward. I see Board Member Nguyen.
There's one thing I think we should know the answer to. No matter what we put in the officer's file, if the investigation's incomplete and they leave, then the problem of portability of bad behavior comes into play. Are they taking that bad behavior to another agency, Williamson County Sheriff's Department or whatever? The question I would have is, whatever we put in the file, would the Metro Police Department share that information with a background investigator from another agency? Or are they restricted from sharing that information? Commander Laura may be able to answer that question now, but I know that one of the things that we hear around the country is that agencies looking at the background of officers from other agencies have left cannot get access to their personnel file because of some legal restriction. So that would be my question. I'm all for putting whatever in the file needs to be there, but I don't know whether Metro would share that information with so it would defeat our purpose to let another agency know, if you know what I mean. So thank you.
I see Mr. Goddard.
I'm not sure that's a subject that in the first round can get in the revised MOU, but we're going to have the top Metro legal officers in the room in a couple of weeks, and I suggest we ask and press them on that, what can be done.
Yeah, I see Mr. Holloway, but I like that. Let's do that, okay? And we'll discuss that at our next meeting.
It varies on what agency that you come from. And our department has gotten caught up in situations where we've hired other people and did not see the situation that the former employee came from another agency. Had we were shared what kind background he had or what he was involved in or what he left from, we probably wouldn't have been caught up in that situation hiring him from day one. But, like I said, it depends on the agency. And, it's important to really know what they're leaving from, because, if he did it there, he can do it also here, you know, especially if he's, person that, mistreats citizen unprofessionally, in a better word.
I see Attorney Yu.
So the two parallel questions I think that are going on, one is, I think direct from Member Goddard was, can the board make a recommendation to place us in some sort of file, personnel, HR, Civil Service Commission, or MMPD, or otherwise? And I was checking the rules, and yes, even with a not sustained finding or an unfounded finding, if you exonerate the officer, nothing stops you from making other recommendations, even if it's not related to discipline. So that's the easy question. And the second, more parallel question is, what responsibilities does the police department have? What is their current practices? That's something actually that I think a policy advisory point about how the hiring and what they looked at and whether they went in person to get the actual files of personnel. We did something similar to that, and I think at the time, and I don't think it's changed, the police department did not go behind that curtain of, no, there's nothing that we can report to you about his case. But what has often been reported, when you actually go in person, you actually pull the physical file, you'll see something like what we're suggesting we put in the officer's file this time. If they called Davidson County Police Department though, and were to ask, is there anything in the file, they may not get a, yes, there is. They'll probably get a no, even with this resolution report in that file.
All right, anything further? Anything further on that? Okay, I see Member Spencer.
Hi, and I think my main concern is still just being able to flag that. Because even if we're from advisor you and what you're saying, like even if we make sort of a note in this file, but still, I'm still kind of unsure from our discussion of like what really stops, what really makes this, makes the file even have the kind of weight still. Because if this person is already like quit from investigation, they're not gonna come back into town, most likely. They might be around in the surrounding area, but perhaps it might behoove them to go even further away. And so I don't know. I see where the conversation is going, and I think that I would love to have more conversations around how do we prevent this from being what was a problem that happened here in Nashville, to being a problem that, you know, happens in, I don't know, Dallas or Indianapolis, because we don't know where this person is going, but we also seem to be very limited in our ability to let other people know what has happened here. And I find myself still very concerned about that, and just sitting over here racking my brain over like any other methods that we can continuously use as an institution to be able to kind of make people more aware of that. I know you were talking about the database around like bad cops and everything, but I feel like there should be an additional action we can take that gives that a little bit more weight and a little bit more power to it. I'm just not entirely sure what it is at the moment, perhaps.
Not sure we're going to resolve this right now, so, but we've got a lot in the hopper there. Okay, all right, good deal. I just have one more thing about this report, specifically number 7, under findings of fact. The supervisor of Officer 2 states that he did not have an interaction with the complainant that day, but that the following day he reviewed the incident report, which stated that Officer 2 had been struck by the complainant, prompting the supervisor to ask, "This says you got hit. Do you have any injuries? Why didn't you let anyone know you'd been hit?" And Officer 1 replied, "No, it was just another night." I don't know what that means, but maybe after you guys, went through everything. What's the context of that? No, it was just another night. Was it just another night because he's used to punching people, or was it just another night because, and he didn't report it? Is it something that was reported? And I don't know what that means.
Well, those two speculations are as good as any, and probably the ones that I would come up with as well. This is an officer who did not report to his supervising sergeant that he had been struck the night before, which is typically something that would be reported to their sergeants. So whether you believe that the officer was telling the truth to his sergeant by making that statement is I think, questionable, and I think that's why it was put in the findings of fact, that this is a statement that the sergeant made about what this person had to say about the events from the night before.
Okay. It sounds pretty glib to me. Yeah. Right, right, right. Which he didn't report in the initial report. I wanted to ask Commander Laura if he was able to get any further clarification. Okay, it's something that we'll come back to in the future. We appreciate you looking into that for us and working with our research people, to get us an answer. Okay, all right. So do I hear a motion to accept the recommendation of the Executive Director on 2021-047?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor, is there any further unreadiness? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. All right, excellent, thank you for that. And that moves us now to 48-048. Director Fisher.
This is in relation to MNCO CC 2021-048. It is a community member initiated complaint where the complainant alleged that on August 10th, 2021, the complainant called 911 to report 2 individuals trespassing on her property, her son and her son's girlfriend. The 2 officers who responded to the call, Officer 1 and Officer 2, failed to perform their duties and falsely arrested the complainant. The MNCO investigator interviewed the complainant, both Officer 1 and Officer 2, as well as a supervising sergeant who was called by the officers during the incident. When the 2 officers arrived, they are observed via body-worn camera footage to speak individually with the complainant and the alleged trespasser separate from one another. Both give a version of events wherein they defended themselves against the other person's initial assault. Ultimately, the officers decided that it was a civil matter and advised them that they should consult with someone regarding the eviction process. The officers left without making an arrest. Less than 4 minutes later, the complainant's son called 911 to report that the complainant locked him outside and threatened him and his girlfriend. A recording is played for the officers of the complainant allegedly threatening to get people with guns to kick them out. The officers decide that this met probable cause for assault under the Tennessee Code annotated 39-13-11, which provides in part, a person commits assault who intentionally or knowingly causes another to reasonably fear imminent bodily injury. According to the legal resource advisor, a verbal threat only does not meet the element of imminent defined as reasonable probability of danger as opposed to a mere possibility of danger. However, both the sergeant and the night commissioner magistrate judge approved the finding of probable cause. Ultimately, the charge was dismissed by a general sessions judge. The MMPD manual 4.20.040K, obstruction of rights, states that employees shall not knowingly deprive any person of any right to which they are entitled by law or the rules and regulations of the metropolitan government. This is a category B offense, which for a first offense may be disciplined between 8 and 13 days. Using the preponderance of evidence standard, the executive director found that the allegations of deficient performance of duties and obstruction of rights against both officers were not sustained. And that concludes my statement.
Floor is open. Discussion? It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? I have a comment. I like to recognize when I think the officers did the right thing as well and really worked hard to try to stay within the lines. And this looks like one of those cases. And certainly, I mean, I certainly want to recognize that, and we appreciate that, because it sets the kind of standards that we are here to promote and trying to make sure that we have the best relations between the citizens of Davidson County and its police department. So, having said that, is there any further unreadiness? Hearing none, all those in favor of adopting the executive director's recommendation, say aye. Opposed, say no. Thank you. Thank you, Director Fitcher. Now, we come to an item that we've laid off and put aside for a moment. I'll ask Attorney Yoon if the complainant or the individuals who we were waiting for are present.
They are, and again, they will, I guess, hear the recitation from the director about the report, obviously any discussion and findings of fact, but they won't be able to speak until after the board makes its recommendation. So they will be able to speak during the public comment period, which can be moved out of order so
Yes.
they can speak immediately thereafter, but they won't be able to speak before they make the statement, just so everybody's aware.
Excellent. Director Fitcher.
This is in relation to MNCO CC 2021-029. It is a complaint from a community member where the complainant alleged that on December 19, 2020, she was the victim of a shooting. The complainant was not hit, but her vehicle was shot at and the passenger in her car was hit with a non-fatal injury. After several months, the detective suspended the investigation without making any arrests, which the complainant believed was due to the detective's deficient performance of her duties. 6 months after the shooting, the complainant met with the detective, sergeant, and lieutenant to talk about the issues and suspension of the case. The complainant alleged that during the meeting, the lieutenant was discourteous and all three officers lacked professionalism. Specifically, the complainant alleged that the lieutenant interrupted the complainant speaking and all three failed to introduce themselves. The MNCO investigator interviewed all three officers and an additional patrol officer. During the interview of the patrol officer, he acknowledged that there was an additional witness at the scene, but the identity and contact information was not in any of the reports. The detective stated that she did not become aware of the existence of this potential witness until 6 months after the incident, but that she reached out to all of the patrol officers and none of them reported to her that they remembered this potential witness. A recording of the meeting between the complainant and the detectives, sergeant and lieutenant, reveals that the lieutenant did in fact interrupt the complainant while she was speaking, specifically saying, "Let me interrupt you and tell you where we're at." This indicated that he knew that she wasn't finished speaking, but choosing to interrupt her anyway. When the complainant says, "Wait a minute, you're not gonna do this," the lieutenant continues to try and speak over her, saying, "I just wanna tell you where we're at." Less than a minute later, he says, "Can you at least let me finish, and then you can ask all the questions you want." A minute 10 into the meeting, the complainant asked, "How are you gonna tell me there's not enough evidence when I seen who was shooting at me?" The lieutenant's response was, "Then what's his name?" This response appeared to be argumentative and served only to agitate the complainant/victim even more. The lieutenant did introduce himself and the two other officers, but there was a period of time when they entered the room initially that none of the officers say anything. The first person to speak was the companion of the complainant who accompanied her. The executive director finds by the preponderance of evidence reviewed that the allegations against the detective and sergeant are not sustained. The alleged violation of discourtesy against the lieutenant is sustained. In reviewing the lieutenant's disciplinary history, the executive director finds no prior relevant disciplinary history. Discourtesy is a Category F violation. A first offense, which is generally corrected through formal counseling or oral reprimand. In this instance, the executive director, myself, recommends an oral reprimand, and if available, the officer should attend in-service training related to handling victim/witness protocols, procedures, and best practices. Can you put the discipline grid up there? Okay, can you lift it up a little bit? Is it out? Category F. Okay, Category F is there. That's fine. I think it's there. Yeah. Okay. I conclude. Thank you.
Any board member wishes to weigh in on this PRR? I see Mr. Holloway.
I can almost see her point about that. But yet and still, when you're doing the interview with people, you have to control that interview. And certain questions, open-ended questions, you need to ask. And you also have to be professionalism when you're talking to them and let them know that I hear you, I understand you. Let me get with you on this, or not try to cut them off, or even allow them opportunity to be heard. And it also be good sometime to record it, so you can reflect back on it.
I do want to say a couple things. We have a woman here who was shot. She was grazed by a bullet. And she's trying to find out who's been arrested, who's been singled out. She said that she saw it, she had the information, but on the day of the scene, she was, I'm sure, traumatized by what she had just experienced, not only for herself, but for the other person that was in the vehicle with her. And to talk to her and treat her in a way that she is not a victim in this is, I feel like this is not enough. But this is all that we could do based on the category. But what I will say is people who have been shot at or experienced their vehicle being shot at should be treated in such a way, and it's at some point, if it's not in their policies, it should be, that every person should have the ability to be treated as a victim and given all the services that are available to them. This is what we do as a city. This was unacceptable. And so I'll leave it at that.
Dr. Hilden?
Thank you. I think I'm going to pick up and extend on Director Fitchard's comments just now. First, there's trauma. Then there is deep disrespect that many of us know has a gendered component to it. Conversation styles, listening protocols betoken respect or disrespect in ways that, when added with trauma, can be just as violent as other kinds of, and I'm going to use this term intentionally, although not in the legal term, other kinds of assaults. So while I do agree with the executive director's findings, conclusions, and recommendations, I have questions about the type of in-service training that would be available and be provided. If it is not training that harkens to the best standards of trauma-informed care right now, if it is not training that is meeting, at least in this community, acceptable standards around best practices with respect to identity, gender, respect, then that training will be insufficient. So if this is off-the-shelf training that the department currently has that does not meet those standards, then I would not be satisfied with this recommendation. So I don't know if I am asking to make a motion to put conditions around the kind of training. And I see Member Nguyen over here smiling because he probably knows some specific syllabi and protocols that would respond to what I'm casting for. So I will stop my comments there, and I hope pass it to Member Nguyen for a finer touch. Thank you.
Member Nguyen?
Yes, Doctor, there is a national standard of trauma-informed, victim-centered interview of victims and suspects. And Member Holloway's right. You don't ever interrupt a person who's trying to recall an event that's been this traumatized, because their memory is already fragmented from the trauma itself, something they can't prevent. It just happens to everybody. So you have to be patient. The interview's longer. You don't interrupt. You don't use the word why, because victims often blame themselves for the incident. I should have done this, I should have done that. And when you interject the word why as an officer into the interview, they start to question their own selves, and it takes them further into the trauma. So it's a patient, very careful, respectful interview, and I'm not sure whether the lieutenant's been trained in the method or not. It's fairly new. The last 10 years, police have been trained in it. There's a lot of people who teach the topic, and I'm one of them. And it's usually taught from first responders all the way up to command staff. Because of the trauma that we haven't recognized in the past, when we hear someone say they can't remember something, we automatically say you're making a false report. And they try to remember. Even victims who facing a assailant face-to-face can't remember a description of their face. That's not unusual, but in the past, those cases would be dismissed, they'd be closed, and often the victim would be accused of making a false police report. So I have a question. Well, is the case closed? Was a detective assigned to it, or has it just been suspended? Because I don't see where a detective was involved in this case. And the other might be, Doctor, like you said, making a recommendation to the police department to put into their in-service curriculum a session on trauma-informed interview techniques for all their officers.
I'll go with Judge Brown and then Attorney Young.
One question I had, the complainant didn't complain to the board for some 19 months after. This interview where looks like the lieutenant cut her off, how long after the incident was this? Because they talk about a lot of things not being known for 6 months. Was this an interview that the lieutenant had with her right after this incident, which is a whole different thing than an interview that's 6, 8 months later?
This was not an interview for what happened at the scene of the alleged shooting. This was 6 months later, after the investigation included, after they'd already interviewed the complainant, after they'd already interviewed other witnesses, and they'd done a photo lineup attempt. This was really just to talk to the complainant because she had talked to the detective, the sergeant above the detective, the lieutenant, and the commander of that precinct. And they convened a meeting particularly to talk about this. I will note it's not in the short summary, but the commander did not show up for this meeting, and there was some back and forth about whether she had the right time or whether the commander had the right time, or was misinformed about the right time. But that was another, I think, aggressive part about why there was some agitation here, in addition to ongoing, again, problems with communication that were alleged. I'll also, again, emphasize contextually that when the lieutenant asked, well, then what's his name? The reason why we noted that it was so argumentative was this was not a question that he didn't know the answer to. He knew that the complainant did not know the name. The complainant did know the car, did know the owner of the car, did know the name of the owner of the car. And again, there were things that the complainant did know and that she was wanting to be heard about. And for, again, the lieutenant to combat her with and interrupt her several times to say, then what's his name, seemed, again, like hitting a sore spot on something that just wasn't the timing and place of. This wasn't an interview. This was not a tell us everything that happened. This was, we know what the answers to this are, and supposedly this was to help build some community trust and explanation here, and instead it went very, the wrong way.
Apparently they'd had a lineup at some point and she couldn't identify anyone. I was just trying to get, whether the emotions are a lot higher if you've just been shot. That's a whole raw. Everybody's raw. But this was 6 months afterward. If I understood it, this is a meeting between the various parties, and she was concerned that hadn't done, and it does look like one of the investigating patrol officers didn't get a name that should have been gotten. But that's a whole different can of worms. But, and I agree with the report that regardless of when it was, the lieutenant should have been, should have let her say her piece. But to me, it's not quite as bad as if he was cutting her off right when this was real raw. This is 6 months later.
Well, and to answer your question about the timing, it wasn't 6 months that didn't wait a long time to report this complaint. The incident may have occurred October 2020 of the shooting, but the meeting where the discourtesy complaint happened that we've made a finding sustained.
Yeah, we don't have the date of this interview.
Right, it was 6 months after October 2020, so it would have been April of 2021, and she made the complaint in June. So this was only 30 to 60 days from the meeting, from when the allegation of misconduct occurred.
Yeah. When was this meeting?
It would have been April of 2021-ish. I apologize, I don't have the exact date.
Okay.
So she made this complaint within about 60 days, a month or two.
Yeah,
Okay.
The shooting was in December of 19.
October. I believe it was October.
Oh, I'm sorry, no, it's 2020, beg your pardon. My note's wrong. Okay, thank you.
All right, Member Nguyen.
Yeah, a couple of things. Judge, we believe that trauma is lifelong. I mean, you cannot recall details of a crime years after a crime's been committed against you. So it's not unusual, 6 or 7 months or years after that. The other thing that it looks to me, again, it's hard to read between the lines here, but when you ask a victim of a crime a question like, do you know them, when it's obvious that she doesn't, it's in the case file, it sounds like you're detecting deception out of the person giving the statement. So the interview turns from an interview into an interrogation. And it sounds like the lieutenant may have suspected she was withholding information. Why would he ask her? Did she know? That's what the police are supposed to find out. That's not her job. So it's an odd case. And again, the answer to the question is this case closed? Is it suspended? Could you tell us that?
It's suspended. It's been, again, this is I think a new one because they don't always say suspended. They usually use closed or open. But in this matter and in another matter that we had recently, they're using a term called suspended but open. Could it still be opened up? Yes, but with regard to releasing information and public records requests, they have some flexibility with releasing some of it now that it's suspended and open.
Okay, well, thank you all for that discussion. I also was a little concerned about the behavior in as much as mutual respect. Of course, we know that's the pillar of good community relations with our police department. I have a question though. This Family Safety Center, was that an option at the time in terms of identifying some potential wraparound services that the victim may have been able to take advantage of? Or I see it mentioned here. How does that work?
Well, I think usually that's what they do. They refer someone to the Family Safety Center. The Family Safety Center is outfitted with, social workers, those who are trauma informed, and offer, after, for lack of a better term, after event support. And they've been doing really well in that. But I think that, I'm not really sure we can hear from, we'll hear from the complainant in a case on whether or not that was offered, but this is still, this is still like 6 months after that. But yes,
Gotcha.
to answer your question, they usually are connected to victims.
Yes, Member Nguyen.
One thing real quick, the Family Safety Center is sort of designed for the assistance for domestic sexual violence, elder abuse, child abuse, but I'm sure they wouldn't turn anybody away. But it would be unusual for an officer not to offer that option because it wasn't domestic related. So that may have factored into it, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, anything further? All right. Right, do I hear a motion to accept the executive director's recommendation?
So moved.
It's been moved and properly seconded that we accept the executive director's recommendation on item 2021-029. Is there any further discussion? Any further discussion?
Is it accepted with the,
That's what I'm kind of
Yeah, okay.
prompting, right?
right.
I wasn't sure if that modification was gonna throw it into accept but modify.
It will.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
So, I would like to ask the, moving if they would accept a modification to the motion that this be accept but modify, with the modification being that the department is directed to ensure that the required training includes a state-of-the-art module on trauma-informed care interviewing.
All right, any objection from the maker or the
Moving
second?
accepts that, but I will ask if he knows, Legal Advisor Yoon, to say whether we can direct the department or merely recommend to the department.
It would be a recommendation.
Okay, that's, with that, accepted.
All right, if there's no further discussion, any further unreadiness, all those in favor, let it be known by the sign of aye. Opposed, say no. All right. And now we have an opportunity on this particular investigation to hear from the complainant or any other witness. And if you are prepared to come forward, now is the time for public comment. You'll have 3 minutes, but make sure you state your name for the record. From the podium, I think you'll be, oh, is that fine? That's fine. Excellent. Take your time.
My name is Stacy Hall.
I'm sorry, Stacy, could you lean that microphone down? Just thank you.
My name is Stacy Hall. I'm glad that you all are looking at the dates. I don't understand why they refuse to investigate my case. The reason why there's so many gaps in the case is because they refuse to look at my case. When I was shot at, my car was totaled. That's how much they shot. I could not drive my car. My windows was gone, the wheels was gone, everything was gone. This was in October. When I spoke back to her in November, it was around Thanksgiving. So she was out. Granted, agreed, fine. After Thanksgiving, I talked to her in December. She said she'll get back with me. Then in December, Christmas came. So then after that, it was New Year's. This case was not touched for over 6 months. I'm scared to go to my mailbox. I'm scared to take out my trash. I'm calling them. They would not do anything. When they said that I didn't identify the correct person, nobody said anything to me about that. I did the lineup like a week or so after. Nobody notified me until February, oh, well, the person you identified was not correct. But they had initially told me, because the person who was in the car, she stayed at my house. The person whose car it was, she stayed at my house. They sent the stuff up to the DA's office without my permission. And I say that because I asked them, before you send anything up to the DA, because it's up to the DA whether charges is filed, I get it. Let me know. When I talked to the DA, they told the DA that I didn't know who it was, who car it was. They lied to the DA that they did not. And so I understand why the DA did not choose to prosecute my case. But they lied. I know exactly who it was. No, I didn't know the shooter, but the person whose car it was, she lived at my house for a time. The person whose car it was, we went to Memphis. That's 4 hours in the car. So I know exactly who it was. So when the first detective was like, you know what? If we can't know who the exact shooter is, we know who the person is, who car it belongs to. We know the person who's in the car. I don't know what happened. After that, I could have been dead. They shot up the side of my car. The driver's side window was out. I asked, the police officer said, I know you're a female, we got the paramedics on the way, but do you mind if I search you? Because after he seen the way my car was shot up, he couldn't believe that I wasn't shot. He said the reason why your driver's side window was shot out is because the bullet came through the back passenger side, and evidently by the grace, it missed you, because that's the only thing, well, nobody in the back seat. The person that was hit was in the passenger seat. I don't understand. No training, that's not going to be enough for me, because I could have been dead. I don't know why they refused to investigate. The case is closed. To what they told me, the case is closed. Nothing else has been done, nothing has been said, nothing. The case, they advised me that the case was closed because of the information. The DA decided that they did not want to prosecute. Of course, because the information that the DA got was misinformation. It was not correct. If nothing else, they could have got Miss Britton because it was her car. They could have got Miss Britton because I was leaving the apartments where her mother lived at, where she was at. That's how they seen me. They followed me away from their apartments and followed me up the street. They waited over a year to show me a video. On the video, they said, well, if you look and tell us if you see the car, we need to know for a fact that the car was there. I looked at the video. I don't know where they got that video because I didn't see my car. I know my car was there. They mishandled my case completely. And like I told them, I feel like from the bottom of my heart, because I was not killed, it wasn't important to them. It was not important to them because I didn't die. They mishandled my case. They did not investigate my case. And I don't understand to this day why. Because to me, as a woman, you come to me talking about your car was involved in a shooting and somebody attempted murder, somebody gonna start singing. They gonna think Whitney Houston came back alive. Somebody gonna start singing. They didn't even try. They didn't even try to say nothing to her. I don't know if her relatives or anything worked for the North Precinct or what, but they refused to investigate my case, period. Training, that ain't gonna get it. That ain't gonna get it. The reason, again, for the lapse in the dates, where you seeing all these lapse in the dates, is because they refused to talk to me. When me and her went up there, they had me talking in the hallway. They would not even have the decency or respect to let me go in an office. You know, the North Precinct have the titles and registration place. This lady used to work with me. Her sister still works with me. I get back to work, guess what she say? My sister said she seen you. The whole disrespect, and I don't know why. I don't have a clue. All I know is I was on my lunch break. I had on my pajamas. I done ran up the street on my lunch break. I was less than 2 miles from my house. And my car got shot up. I could have been dead. And they refused. They treated me so bad. They treated me like I did something. And I didn't do nothing. They could have killed me. They could have killed me, and they did nothing. North Precinct did nothing. They never get talking about services. No, sir, no, ma'am. They didn't offer me anything. I ended up going to Chief Drake's office, and I was offered counseling there. But that was almost a year later. That's why it's so many gaps in the time, because they refused to investigate my case. Nobody touched, nobody contact. When I was calling them, I was emailing her. I was doing everything that I thought I was supposed to do. And then to find out all of a sudden it was, I have a lady, every time I went and with the commander, as soon as they called and gave me that date, Miss Payne, she rides with me everywhere I go. I could call her like I just did. I need you to come. When they called and finally, oh, you get to meet with the commander, I'm like, okay, great. I called her, can you go? They called me an hour after the time that they had, saying, are you gonna be able to make it? If it was 10 o'clock, why you wait, and I wasn't there, why you wait till 11 o'clock to call me and see where I was at then? So of course, when I get there, commander gonna be gone. I ain't mad at him. I don't know what time they told him. To this very day, I ain't talked to the commander, and I heard they got a new one. Never talked to him. He never followed up, never nothing. My car, my $40,000 maximum was gone. Gone. That's how they shot it up. It was whole holes in my car. Big holes in my car. No windows, no tires. So, in my opinion, I know y'all done made y'all decision, but counts, whatever training, that's not gonna be enough. If anything else, get somebody else, open my case back up. To my understanding, they contacted, that she sent me an email and told me my case was closed. She sent me an email after I went to the internal, I think it's the internal affairs. I went to the internal affairs. He, real nice guy. I can't think of his name now because it's been years ago. He was like, give him a chance, you know, because when she was talking about the video, I was like, oh, a long time ago, this Brick Church Pike. They got so many factories and stuff. If they had a went October the 19th or October the 20th, the day after, they would have got a video of what happened. They told me that the man who witnessed it in the white man in the red truck, they asked me, why you didn't get his information? I'm looking up here like, do what now? They literally asked me why I didn't get his information. Why you didn't get it? That was your job. But when I went to the PO, to the internal affairs, he said, give him a chance, you know, look at the video. So I go and I look at the video, and I was upset when I went in there because of the way they was talking and treating me. So when I looked at the video, I really wasn't looking at the video because I'm already upset because they didn't tell me that they had a video until after I got upset. So then I'm like, so I emailed her and I said, look, I'm sorry about what happened. Can we schedule a meeting for me to look at the video again with me being calm? Her response to the email was that the case was closed. Anybody have any questions for me?
As a matter of form, Ms. Hall, your comments, can that be debated by this board and it can't be voted on? Certainly am moved by your comments, and we'll do whatever we can to take up with this board anything that might be within our authority, to have further discussion on the just wrenching story that we just heard from you. So I thank you for taking the time and being courageous enough to come forward and let us know about this traumatic experience in your life. We thank you for that. Please state your name.
Susie Payne.
Ms. Payne.
Okay, so the shooting, I know the mother of the passenger in the car that day. She had sent me in Facebook Messenger on October the 17th or 20 that she needed to get out me about somebody in our group, the Mothers Over Murders. Mm-hmm. So I called her. I called Stacy. So on this email, on 10/18/20, Kiera Ward at East Precinct, a detective called me And I told her about what we talked about. And I also let her know on the 18th that they told me they were going to shoot Stacy's house up. The shooting actually happened on the 19th. So this detective was aware of the shooting situation. I let her know, because I do know the other ones too. And I just feel like nobody took the time out to, I mean, you were told the day prior that they were going to shoot her house up, but they shot her car up. And the reason I chose not to call Stacy and tell Stacy what they said is we both have lost sons to murder, and I didn't want her to get out of character. So I chose not to tell Stacy. But I did tell the detective the day prior to the shooting that it was going to happen. So that's all I got to say.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to say something. Thank you. What I've heard here is not only from the complainant, Ms. Hall, but also from Ms. Payne. I've talked to her in the past too, and what I hear is a reoccurring theme that as these women who have lost either a child or lost or been, of course, shot at themselves, that when they go to the police precincts, that they are talked to out in the lobby in front of other people. They are not necessarily treated with respect. They are discussing very personal circumstances within the lobby area, not afforded even the respect of being taken into an office to talk about the loss of their loved ones. In very sensitive, as they're talking about it, there's very sensitive information that is shared, that they're trying to share with officers. And it's just, it's just unacceptable. And it really is, this is not the first, this is 2 times that we're hearing it tonight, the theme, but I've heard this over and over and over again, that detectives who are supposed to be assisting them in helping find either the person who has, harmed them or harmed their loved one, but they are being treated as if they are a bother, or that they are not important in this process. And I think that, there's something to say about these women to come into in this particular venue and talk about what is happening to them. And I know that we don't have a whole lot of answers, but we do need to address the fact that this is a reoccurring theme with the detectives, and the fact that these people are treated with such low regard that they would be talked to about a very sensitive issue in front of just random people in the lobby getting their license plates. It's just unacceptable.
Members of the board. Ms. Haddock.
Yes. So it does seem like a reoccurring theme. And in the recommendations that we can give, does it have to be specific to 029, or can we recommend that any victim that comes into a precinct, they have to be talked to in a private room, or so more general things where we can make sure that this doesn't happen, like these things where people are not treated with dignity and respect, if we can, make sure that that does not happen.
I don't think it can be attached to what we just, to this recommendation. I mean, I do think that you all have the ability to write a letter and address it to the chief of police and say, hey, we've been in these meetings and this is something that is happening, and it's a reoccurring issue. As Mr. Nguyen and Ms. Hildreth said a moment ago, having some trauma-informed listening skills, care and understanding, and having just some compassion about this whole situation where people have lost their loved ones, and not being just solely focused on trying to find out who did this, but you're also dealing with loved ones, people who are, experiencing the residual effects of harm. And so I think that this is something that needs to be addressed on the higher level, and they just need some more training. I mean, if you're going to be a detective, then you should be trained in trauma-informed care. And you should not be talking to people in a lobby full of people about someone who's lost their son to gun violence.
I saw Judge Brown, I'm sorry, Mr. Whittle, then Judge Brown. Oh, how courteous. Okay, Judge Brown.
I think the suggestion that perhaps a letter from the chair to the chief about the investigation would be appropriate. My concern is, when I look at the summary of the complaint allegations, there's nothing about the fact that she was not given private rooms or anything else. The board can't act if that's her. She's got a lot more, given us a lot more information here than is in the summary of the complaint. The board's got to act on what the director, what you tell us in the summary of complaint. You're telling us a lot more that's not in this. And I think we have to make sure that we're acting on what the complaint is. And this, frankly, it disappointed me when I saw that there was apparently an officer that didn't take down information from the beginning. That bothered me, but that wasn't the complaint. And so I think we need to be, if we've got, and I see the legitimate concerns about the investigation and such, but that just is not in the summary of the complaint, and it leaves the board kind of hung. But I do think we should have a letter to the chief asking him to take another look at this.
Thank you. Mr. Whittle.
I want to co-sign the letter. Also, I'm curious to know what is policy around where they have to be interviewed. I mean, is that something that Commander Laura can tell us, or do you know about what's the policy around where a victim can be interviewed?
Good evening. So we don't have an actual policy of where to go and interview. It's, you always want to be cognizant of whoever you're interviewing and making sure that you are in an area that's going to be private. And it just all depends on the situation itself. If you believe that it's something that needs to be in private, they will find a place to go and interview in private, but there's not a specific policy that says you shall, that I know of, and I can go and look, but there's no policy that I know of that says you have to interview somebody in this specific area or in this specific setting. You have to go into a room that's enclosed. The precincts do have interview rooms. And so if that's something that is needed for an official investigation, an official interview, that's one thing. If you are having a conversation with somebody and it's not an actual interview, then that's treated a little bit differently. So for interviews themselves, we're not going to interview anybody out in the open. If we're going to interview for a case, you will be taken to a private location where it can be done correctly in a place that's confidential, so the information is confidential and you're not gonna have other people around you. If it's a conversation where you're just, again, you're not technically interviewing anybody, you're just talking to them regarding maybe something that's happened or a case, that's gonna be treated, again, differently than an actual interview, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay.
Several hands. Member Spencer.
I think my concern as well is more so, and I was going around the same track that you're thinking, Member Whittle, around if this is policy, and particularly like if this is policy enforcement. From what we've heard, there's been a discussion around sensitive information, which it seems like with a policy might be, and forgive me, just from if I'm inferring correctly from what you're saying, that the conversation might have been deemed something different rather than an interview while this person is discussing sensitive information or information that could be perhaps maybe this is wrong phrasing, held in retaliation. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily a safe space for that person to have that kind of conversation. And so for me, this also leads into a question of how this policy can be refined, and then also when it comes to policy enforcement. Because if we're also looking at, this is also sensitive information that a person is discussing and to an officer in a place where in a setting where they don't feel safe, but then also I'm assuming there's other officers around. And so there should be some kind of extra enforcement in place where we have a kind of point to say like, hey, you're having what seems to be a really hard conversation for somebody, well, it will be a hard conversation for anyone. Maybe this is not the right time for this conversation, or we need to find a different space. And so I think that perhaps on point A, refinement of what this policy says and what this policy means, and then B, also how this is enforced. And perhaps maybe we can look into recommendations around just what would be the more appropriate way for us to go about this when it comes to policies and rules, basically.
Thank you. Again, just to make clear that an interview is going to be treated very differently than a conversation. So for those interviews, we have standard operating procedures for the different units. And so they may have that in their standard operating procedure saying, if you're going to interview, this is how you're going to do it. I don't have that specific information in front of me, but I know that if it's an interview, they're going to treat it very differently. It's going to have a, there's going to be rules attached to it, I guess, or policy attached to how we do that. But if it's again, just a conversation when somebody comes in and you're talking about it, that's going to be treated differently. And again, I can't give you, how they're going to do that because there's no specific ruling saying this is how you will treat these conversations.
But if I may, but from what the conversation has been here tonight, it seems that there was never really fully distinction made around that for someone. Yeah. And they were asked to talk about something that was very traumatic and very specific in a space that was not an appropriate setting. And to me, that clearly outlines that the policy perhaps is too vague. Because if I am operating with this understanding and also operating understanding in this position of authority as a police officer, and this person is trying to get my attention, tell me what's happening, it's traumatic, there's a lot going on, but I'm trying to have this kind of conversation, even if I'm calling it a conversation interview, where I know there's the difference of the nomenclature, but the fact of the principle is that for this person, they don't know that there's like this whole other dividing line. And that dividing line isn't being communicated against. There's no further conversation with this person. And so that's where I think that the point of refinement of policy as well as enforcement really is something that we should take a look into and when we come into recommendations.
And again, I'm very sorry that you had to deal with that Ms. Hall had to deal with that because that's a very traumatic situation. But I think it's just learning to deal with people with dignity and respect. And you have to be able to read that and go, this may not be the best place to do it. Let's go ahead in a room because of the emotions that are attached to that type of conversation. And so again, that's something that we always want to look at in general. How are you going to talk to somebody? In what setting are you talking to them in? What is the context of what you're talking? And then take the right decision of, hey, this is a conversation we don't want to have in the hallway. Let's go ahead and have this in a room. And so it's something, again, that I'm sorry that didn't happen the way it needed to be, but, we're definitely something we can look into.
Thank you, Commander Laura.
I think.
Dr. Hildreth.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to try to be extremely respectful of protocol of where we're in the process and what we are able and not able to do. I understand that our process does not allow us to respond to the public comment. But I want to acknowledge on the record that if we did not have the tremendous gift of this comment, that we wouldn't have the information to think about how maybe we're going to look at some other policy matters that are within our purview. So I just want to give thanks for the gift, understanding what it cost, and then understanding what debt I believe that creates in me as a member sitting on this board. So that is, you know how I roll, y'all. What's the agenda for what we need to do forward? Some big buckets that we're hearing is going forward, this category of suspended but open that Attorney Yoon says may be new lines up with a victim being told that the case was closed. So I'm wondering if we need to have conversation and clarity around police practice with informing victims of the actual and accurate status of their case. Because if in fact the case is not closed, but it is suspended but open, then maybe there's something else that can happen. And so we'll need to know that. Second thing I'm wondering about is a policy of care for trauma victims. Gunshots, gun violence is traumatic. An adjacency to that is traumatic. Being the target of it is traumatic. So we have somebody coming, I think this is actually a matter of public safety. So if we're talking about attending to the public safety of a member of our community who has experienced trauma from gun violence, then I think that we're also going to have to ask the police department to examine distinctions that don't have differences. So having very well-defined policies and practices for interviews, but having nothing for someone who has experienced some form of gun violence traumatically coming into the police department space. There's a gap there. And I think naming it in this space helps. Whether naming it in the space of the MOU negotiation may help even further. And as always, we are very grateful to Commander Laura, who comes and listens attentively, and I believe takes the nuance of this information back. We hope that that also helps, because no other member of our community who has experienced the trauma of gun violence needs to be attended to in a hallway. Finally, I think I just want to repeat, which is maybe a standard theme that I have, and that is the great gift that the founders of the Community Oversight Board gave to us is not only a policy, a forum, but a way in which we are here in the public and we are being recorded and we're being televised. So that means that very important piece of information we got lives on beyond this meeting. And so we as community members who care, I think, have a responsibility. Those of us who experience this personally need to go back and watch it again. I know I will. And I'm going to be stopping because I think that there's more on this list for us to bring back. But for those who care about this work, who stood up this forum, who invite community members into this space, and yes, Judge Brown, I believe that we are in this mode of still learning. Even though we're 4 years old, we haven't done that many PRRs. So it does hit differently when we do our homework and read this, but then come in after we can't do anything more and hear something else. This is just an invitation for us to get our policy, our practice better and better. We're going to be doing our work, but I'm also calling on the community to do your work too. You need to watch this, you need to think about it, and you need to do what you do, because it helps us do what we do. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, I continue to notice something systemic about, the breadth of complaints that we receive. And I believe this is the 5th complaint, I may be wrong off by 1 or 2, that deals with, for lack of a better term, a kind of a disengagement on the part of detectives when it comes to cases that community members think are very important. I don't know if maybe it's a part of our research team or collaboration with Commander Laura, but I'll ask the question again. I want to know, it would be interesting to know what the typical caseload of a detective is. It would be interesting to track how that trends it'd be interesting to know if in fact some of this dismissive behavior is a matter of how they have culturally prioritized certain instances, like if you ain't dead, okay? I think we have an obligation to do a dive on that and to track that, because this is just a recurring theme. Of course, we're not here to necessarily, we do have the authority to do these types of research and to make recommendations. And if it comes out to be, hey, there's just too much going on, then maybe we need to move people into that and hire more detectives so that we can treat people courteously and with respect and be thorough in our findings. If it's a cultural thing, of course, that's going to be harder to evidence. Okay, but we will begin to see trends and things like that. So I'm asking, as a result, specifically of what we've heard here tonight from these two brave and courageous citizens, that this board here, after you've had a chance, after your office had a chance to look into it, how we might begin to understand what's going on over there. Okay, I mean, in an empirical, quantifiable way, because I don't think this is the last time we're going to hear these. I saw Member Nguyen and I saw Member Holloway. Member Nguyen?
Yeah, I wanted to make the comment, Doctor. I think I agree with your comments. This is, when you do it right, this is not just a group within the organization. Victim-centered, trauma-informed, care of crime victims is a departmental-wide culture change. Everybody has to be trained, from the chief all the way down to the dispatchers. Everybody has to be trained in it. And what you hope when you do it is you not only are respectful to crime victims, you listen to the story, whether you can solve it or not. Many crimes aren't solved, but you can make it worse for the victim by the way you treat them. You re-victimize the victim, even though you don't have the evidence to solve the case. And that means you promote healing. And that's fairly new to police culture. That's left to social workers. But it does work when you practice trauma-informed interviewing and care with victims, and it starts, again, with recruit training, and it goes all through the officer's career. So whatever we write to the chief, we should ask them to examine whether they want to look at shifting to, like agencies have around the country, a more trauma-informed victim center. And they may be already doing it in some cases. They've got great social workers at the police department who work with homicide survivors, who work with rape victims. So I don't know where they are, but from this board, I think you're right. We should be a voice that says, we think you should change because of the things, the pattern we've seen in the care of crime victims by some of the officers who have complaints to complain to this board.
Mr. Holloway.
The caseload depends upon the work area. And as the news media said, one of the worst areas is in 37208 area. And like I said once before, we are policing this city with almost comparably the same number of officers did when I was there 10 years ago. And we compare Nashville with other cities comparable to Nashville, and they have probably 2,000 or 2,500 officers, as opposed to we have a little over 1,300 officers. So you can't police with the same number of officers as you did 10 years ago, because we got hundreds of people moving here each month. And so, as the news media said, 37208 is the highest crime area and the heavy caseload. That's what we're dealing with.
Thank you, Ms. Holloway. Any other board members? Yes, Member Spencer.
I hear this point as well, but I still feel rather concerned as more so going into where you're talking, Dr. Hildreth, as it relates to policy with the department. Because even if you're doing a lot of work, you still need to have the kind of basic understanding of how do I work with this person. I think that is shown with any sort of people that work in any sort of kind of program that deals with like marginalized folks, for example. Even though like you're working a hard workload, you're being paid what, like somewhere around under $40,000, working day and night, doing everything for specific people, for a specific group of people. But you always, each interaction has to be very, very tailored and very intentional and trauma informed. And so I think again, where the crux of the matter is, and I think where I feel like our next moves as a board should start to align is where it comes in terms of recommendations of policy and policy enforcement. Because I feel there's several different layers of where policy and policy enforcement perhaps just seem to have failed on the first officer's even intent on having a conversation, and then subsequently every other officer that was able to even hear that conversation, to see that conversation happening, and then not say to the other officer, hey, perhaps this might be over the line. Perhaps this might not be the space for that conversation. And then also on the point of where the distinction is made with regards to that specific policy. We can't have a conversation, if you're in conversation, if we're having a conversation and you're in context A, but you haven't told me about context A, because I'm in context B, then we're not fully having a conversation. It's not a full-fledged conversation of what needs to happen. And so I feel that, and I would like to ask the rest of the board, more so, what do we see as our next steps in taking moves to address that?
Well, there's been several recommendations, and amongst them are looking at our interview privacy issue, trying to find out just what's going on over there with the workload and with the detectives. But I'll segue that over to the executive director and ask that her office do a little more investigation that can help us to answer that question as to what is our next move in regards to specifically looking at the kind of trauma-informed training kind of recommendations we can make, looking at how we might begin to track and trend caseload for that particular division, learning a little bit more about it as a board. I think it couldn't hurt us, you know, and then begin to understand a little bit more about their policy. So if I could ask for some feedback on that at our next meeting, that would be great. Director Pitcher.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we may, if we have the opportunity, is to see if there's policies already written in other cities that are working in their cases with a trauma-informed lens. I know that New York at our NACO conference, they just created an entire department that deals with this type of issue. And so looking to see what type of policies that they have that we might be able to adopt. Some of that language would be important. And so, we can give you an update at the next meeting for sure.
I hope you'll pardon me if I put you on the spot here.
No, that's okay.
We've recently hired a social worker.
Yes,
and
I
I'm
was going to say
asking
something about that.
if in fact, when a complainant like Ms. Hall comes in and makes that complaint, is it going to be part of their role to identify wraparound services associated with the real life trauma that's going on? And so that means that if we, moving forward, we can have a direct hand in addressing that issue.
So this was the whole reason and purpose of having a social worker, that I began to amplify this. These are the types of complainants that come to us that need these types of services. So I think that we are really on the cusp of moving forward in how we are servicing our community members who are experiencing trauma. I mean, we would not be able to, 6 months ago, we were still like raising the red flag about it. And we are here today saying that we now have a senior social worker on staff that will be able to address some of these needs. That does not, of course, change the fact how detectives, police officers are treating them on that front end. It doesn't change that. We have to be able to, I do think that having policies in place would be helpful in how they are to deal with those on the front end of trauma or triggers or whatever they're experiencing. And so I think that we are trying to mesh the two, and we'll figure out a solution of a best practice, because that's what we want. We want a best practice from our office as well as, experiencing people who are experiencing, because these people just need to be handled with care. You have to have compassion. Like, it's rooted and grounded in empathy and compassion. If we had that, I think that we would be doing the best practice in this city, for real,
All right, I see Mr. Goddard.
Very quickly, I agree with all that has been said. I would like us also to look for best practices or something with respect to how this is checked on after the fact. I mean, there's a mantra that what gets measured gets done. Slightly off of that will be what gets checked randomly from time to time gets done better and more broadly. And whether there's regular audits there's going to be video of all this stuff going forward, with all the body worn camera and all. Whether the police department or we can do some random audits of interviews and other interactions with trauma victims, things of that nature. I don't know exactly what that should look like. I don't know how big it should be, but I think there's some piece of it that could be greatly helpful along those lines.
Well, I thank you all for a very full and robust discussion, and rest assured, we will be following up on these items that we're discussing here. My checklists, I check them twice, so we appreciate you. We appreciate you, okay? And please feel free to come back at any time and let us know, whether it's this incident or others that may be known in the public. If I may diverge for a second, speaking of that checklist, while Commander Laura is here, at our previous meeting, we asked that, and I'm sorry if you've addressed this already, but we've asked that you go back to the chief and to the department and request, kind of off subject here, that for all redacted records that a sworn officer sign off. I believe that was kind of a paraphrase of a request we made last meeting. Do you have any update on that? Yeah, well, it really grew out of the body worn camera, but but it became more of a redacted records issue. At our last meeting, we asked that you go back and inquire as to whether or not we could get a sworn officer to sign off on any redacted records that come to the COB. And I just wanted to know if you had a chance to follow up on that. Because as you know, right now, civilians are involved with that process, and they're not necessarily a sworn officer, and we have no jurisdiction over civilians. So that's where that kind of grew out of, and it's on my checklist, and I just wanted to see if you had a response or if you had a chance to inquire.
So I have inquired, and I am still waiting for a response back. They're still looking into that situation. So right now, it's something that I don't have a firm answer for yet, but it has been brought up to the executive staff, and so they're looking into that.
Really appreciate that. I'll keep it on the list.
Thank you.
All right. As we approach the 8 o'clock hour, I just want to move it along from this point. So let's go, if there's no objection, to the next item, which is item number 8. Either Director Fitcher or Member Goddard, can you give us an update, please?
Item 8 is the Memorandum of Understanding Committee for the Police Department. The update is what Executive Director Fitcher said earlier. We have a meeting scheduled in the next couple of weeks. We'll be dealing with the various issues the committee's talked about and the other ones that have been mentioned in the context of the MOU in this meeting here as well.
Thank you. Anything to add, Director Fitcher? That moves us to the next item, item 9. Mr. Crowell Williamson, on the MNPD Semi-Annual Policy Advisory Tracking Report.
All right, good evening, board. I apologize, I didn't print any copies for you, so you'll either have to crane your necks and look at that or just listen to me. Dealer's choice. I'll try to keep it fairly brief because I know I'm the last thing standing in the way between all of us and the rest of our evening, but I do think this is an important topic that I don't want to just skip over. If you'd play the slideshow, Marion, that'd be great. Just a little bit of background to refresh all of your memories, or for our new board member to inform you. This is a continuation of a conversation that began at our June board meeting. Commander Lara and I had some back and forth on the difference between the acceptance of policy recommendations and the implementation of policy recommendations. And what has transpired over the last 3 or 4 months has been conversations with myself, Director Fitchard, Commander Gilder, and Commander Lara, just at an effort at ensuring transparency regarding MNPD's responsiveness to our work. So that's partially been clarifying their position, partially clarifying our position, and implementing and codifying the core of our recommendations. So today I'm just going to aim to synthesize where we're at today. And I do, before I get into it, really want to thank both Commander Gilder and Commander Lara. They've been very willing participants in this conversation, and I think that that shows itself in the results that we have. As I mentioned, this report basically gauges which policy recommendations the COB has made, have been implemented, which have been partially implemented, which have not been implemented, and which they're unable to implement. And this is because, per the memorandum of understanding between our departments, upon the receipt of a policy advisory report, the chief has 45 calendar days to respond to each recommendation, including acceptance, partial acceptance, or non-acceptance of the recommendations. And I stole this idea from the auditing world. For those who aren't aware, auditors are very good at following up on their recommendations and making sure that they are adhered to. Me being a researcher, that's not a practice that I'm familiar with, so I was keen to borrow that from the world of auditing. I think it's a good one. And so that is the impetus and the reason for this report. And I appreciate all the auditors for doing that. So just to catch us up to speed, we've made 31 policy recommendations, all of which MNPD's responded to. There are 4 of those that are not implementable per Metro Legal, so we're actually dealing with 27 implementable recommendations per the department. As of writing, MNPD has fully implemented 19 of the 27, partially implemented 3, not implemented 3, has 1 under implementation, and 1 they are unable to implement. And that is relative to June, when they had fully implemented 11, partially implemented 6, not implemented 10. So for those keeping score at home, the last few months, this conversation has led to 8 more recommendations being fully implemented and 7 recommendations that were not at all implemented being partially or fully implemented. So I think that's a real testament to the work that has been done over the last couple months by all parties. I was intending on going report by report and recommendation by recommendation, but in the interest of time, I'll just go with the recommendations that have not been accepted and implemented. So for this most recent report, 3 of the 4 recommendations, you remember, were not legally implementable per Metro Legal. The 4th is actively under implementation, so we can move on. Soft, empty hand control, nothing to see here except that MNPD has implemented both these recommendations. The hiring procedures report, this is real small on this screen, I apologize, but I believe you have copies of this report as well, emailed to you. Of the 10 recommendations here, MNPD's implemented 11 recommendations. They've implemented 9, not implemented 1, and are unable to implement 1. And this is where the meat of the changes, or rather the implementation, has been, in that following our conversation, MNPD has now fully implemented recommendations 1 through 4, 6, 7, and 11, none of which were implemented when we began this conversation. So that's big steps and ones that I think we should be proud of as a board. The one recommendation that they have not implemented is recommendation number 5, which is MNPD should work to increase the racial, ethnic, gender, age, and language diversity of the recruitment section's background investigators to align with the population of Nashville more closely. When Chief Drake originally responded to this, he provided demographics of the background investigators. 85% of them were white when he did that. Most of them are men. And when we got a more recent update, that had just gotten whiter and more male. So in fact, that recommendation has not been implemented. It's kind of been anti-implemented. I see a hand.
Yes, I've recently come to understand through anecdotal evidence, admittedly, that a lot of people of color wash out of the academy at a certain point. I believe it's called the law block. Have you ever heard of that?
I have heard about that, and actually at the MMPD staff meeting today, they were talking about how this last class had a ton of people fail out of the law block, and they were talking about ways to rectify that, yes.
Now, who is the instructor for the law block at MMPD? Maybe Commander Laura can tell us?
Yeah, that's
I mean,
a
just so
Commander
I know
Laura
a point of
question.
contact, not placing anything anywhere, but just to be clear.
Yes, sir. So there's 5 different instructors, or there's instructors for 5 different blocks. And then we also have a general exam at the very end, a comprehensive exam, I should say, of all the 5 blocks. I actually teach block 5. So it's one of those where each block focuses on a specific type of law. And then, you know, there's a couple blocks, you know, the constitutional law, constitutional or criminal law, criminal procedure, con law. And so there's different types of law we go over the TCA. Some blocks are easier for some people to understand and to grasp than others. Some do really well on one block, don't do so good on another just because of the type of information. Different people process different information different times. So like I said, we do have 5 blocks. We have different instructors for those blocks, but all the instructors have taught these blocks for a long time. So.
Well, it's just very interesting. I don't know if we can draw anything from, it's whether or not it's truly disproportional. Folks falling out, I would certainly love to know the answer to that question, if it's disproportional.
Well, I imagine Commander Laura and I would have the same answer to that question, which is we would have to check and see.
Yeah. Okay.
And just to be clear, that does not actually relate to this recommendation number 5.
Okay.
Background investigators are not
Thank you.
sworn officers.
Okay.
Generally, they're often retired officers who will come back and review candidates. So that's a totally different, although equally important issue in my mind. Yes. On to the next slide. Recommendation 9, we recommended that MNPD should add the executive director or their designee as a voting member to the DCOP panel. MNPD no longer uses a DCOP panel to review candidates, and according to Commander Gilder, there's no comparable body that's replaced the DCOP panel that votes on each applicant. So we are scoring this as a no longer enforceable recommendation. Onto the use of force consent decrees. Of these 7 recommendations, MMPD has fully implemented 6 and partially implemented 1. The partial implementation is rather, it's semantic, I suppose. We recommended that MMPD should categorize all use of force above unresisted handcuffing into 3 levels that would guide the reporting and investigation of the use of force. They did do part of this recommendation, but they didn't accept the reporting thresholds, or excuse me, they did accept the reporting threshold for any force above unresisted handcuffing, but they didn't accept the 3-level categorization. So that's a partial acceptance, or partial implementation. 8 can't wait, use of force policy recommendations. The one to focus on here is recommendation 3, which is our recommendation that MMPD amend their policy prohibiting the shooting of firearms at moving vehicles to specify that the only circumstance, I'm losing power, that the only circumstance where shooting at vehicles is allowed is when an occupant of the vehicle is using deadly force other than the vehicle itself against the officer or another person. And specifically, we recommended that shooting at moving vehicles be prohibited except for the specified circumstances, and that the disciplinary category for shooting at a moving vehicle be included. MMPD's response to this is basically they agree and they think they have already implemented this recommendation based on policy that they have related to, you can see it all here, but they've already banned discharging a firearm at or from a moving vehicle unless absolutely necessary to protect the life of the employee or others. They also have a prohibition designed to protect officers and reduce the need to use deadly force in that employees shall not knowingly place themselves in a position where they would be in jeopardy of being struck by a suspect vehicle or knowingly stand or step into the path of a vehicle, creating circumstances where the use of force may be necessary. It's their belief that those 2 statements, as well as the policy that use of force be reasonable and necessarily used in an objectively reasonable manner, they think that makes it clear to officers that they have already done this recommendation. And it's our interpretation that that's not the case. Leading organizations like PERF, the IACP, and the DOJ really intentionally use and create language to prohibit firing weapons at moving vehicles unless very specific extenuating circumstances exist. And this kind of cobbled together policy or multiple different policy provisions that MMPD has sounds like it accomplishes a similar goal, but we don't believe that it does, and we believe that it's not the clearest way to communicate that message to rank and file officers. The language of those organizations I referenced is very clear, it's very direct, and I had to read this language a number of times before I could kind of put myself in the position where I would understand it to mean the same thing. So that's just a disagreement that we have. And finally, the Policy Advisory Report on Immigration Enforcement. That second recommendation is not legally enforceable per Metro Legal. Our legal advisor at the time had a different opinion than Metro Legal, but again, we will not count that one for now. And the third recommendation, we recommended that MMPD should create and implement training on the difference between administrative and judicial warrants, and and what ICE can and cannot do while conducting immigration enforcement in public versus in reasonable expectation of privacy areas. And I'm just going to read Commander Gilder's response and why they disagree. MMPD trains officers that immigration enforcement remains solely a function of federal law enforcement and that the MMPD has no authority to investigate or enforce immigration laws. Implementing training on federal immigration law and enforcement would give the appearance that we condone or encourage our officers to become involved in immigration matters and could cause officers to become confused on their role in such cases. We continue to believe that the better practice is to inform officers that they play no role in federal immigration enforcement. For these reasons, the MMPD respectfully disagrees with the recommendation. So that's that disagreement there. And finally, stealing another page out of the auditor's book, what I want to do going forward with our policy advisory reports is include what is called a management response form. This is something that is often done in Yellow Book auditing, which is auditing of government agencies. And you can see it's pretty clear here. This is an example from the Office of the Inspector General in Chicago. They will lay out all the details of the recommendations that they're making to a department. They will have a column for the recommendation, for whether the department agrees or disagrees, the proposed action, the implementation target date, and the party responsible. Those last three columns that you see there are what we have not been doing. We've just been asking the chief to agree or disagree. And I think having the proposed action that the department will take, as well as the target date and who is responsible specifically for those implementations, would go a really long way in helping us not have to go through such back and forths in the future with our recommendations. So the last slide is just a mock-up that I did of what that would look like. Using the soft empty hand control as an example, we would just provide Chief Drake with an empty table like this, and in an ideal world, he would respond to each of those columns with clear agreement, disagreement, action, implementation, and the responsible party. And Commander Gilder said he had no issues or saw no concerns with this being implemented in the future, so every other policy advisory report that we produce in the future will now have this attached to it. And so I'll bring this to you every time I have policy recommendations. And that's all I got. So I threw in an extra slide.
This has been a service of the Metro
That's
Nashville
all I got, unless there are
Network.
any questions.
If you would like,
that on the report?
I have one question in regards to the immigration enforcement. It seems like what I can recall, Captain Gilder's response is the same exact response that Chief Anderson gave those many years ago. Did he have any, well, how can I say it? So they're not training them because he doesn't want them to think that they're having this enforcement agency, enforcement participation. But when they encounter these types of things, what are they supposed to do then?
I mean, their policy is generally just that that's out of their jurisdiction. And they believe that not training for specific instances, as it was outlined in Commander Gilder's response, would create confusion rather than training that is out of their jurisdiction.
So, for instance, when this was brought up back when it initially came to light, was because of an incident that happened in Hermitage between a citizen, an undocumented father, and his son. And then ICE showed up. And so my point is, when these incidents occur, what are police officers, or what did he say, police officers are supposed to do when they are in the middle of these? Are they just supposed to drive off? Or, I mean, like, what is the response, or do we know?
I don't mean to speculate too much, other than to say that I believe that if there's a federal agency, they can, well, no, I don't actually want to speculate on that any further, because I don't have that information in front of me, but it might be something worth following up on if the board is so inclined.
How would you characterize the effectiveness of the relationship around policy changes in the implementation between the MNPD and the COB or MNCO? How would you characterize that trending?
I would characterize it as an extremely positive trend, to be honest with you. I think that, as I mentioned at the top, the collaboration that Commander Gilder in particular has had with us has been very open, very transparent, and very thorough in the work that he's provided with us. And you can see that in the fact that they heard the concerns that we had and really directly made changes to their policies. I outlined in the report that I gave you the specific timelines that those changes will be made, the ways that they will be codified, which I felt was very important. We should have those in about 2 weeks per Commander Gilder's timeline, and if by some miracle those come back and they're completely different from what he said, then I would have a different answer. But for now, I have no reason to believe that they'll come back in any way other than what we've discussed, which is to say, very positively.
Excellent. Anything further? Hearing none. Thank you very much for that very informative report. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. There is one order of new business. Mr. Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to make this really quick. And by the way, before I get to this on the trauma issue, if any of you are interested, because I teach for IACP, we've got a 3-day trauma-informed course curriculum if you'd like to see it.
Yes.
I'd be more than happy to share it with you, and I can put it in a PDF form and email it to you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what is IACP?
The International Association of Chiefs of Police.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so,
I should know
and
that,
I've
but
talked to them for about 30 years now, so here's my business. I'd like the board to, and I'll put this in the form of a motion, to invite Greta McLean, who is the executive director of Silent No More, which is a local nonprofit that works with victims of sex assault, in particular, officer sex assault. I'd like for her to come to the next available board meeting to present on what she's done in the history of sexual misconduct inside the Nashville Police Department. So let me give you a little context to this as well. Sexual misconduct by law enforcement is a national problem. It has always been a problem, but only in the last few years have been the solutions to it. There is a national protocol now, and this protocol was created for the Justice Department through the Office of Violence Against Women at the Department of Justice, and I've got a copy of it, and the director has a copy, and I'd like for her to send out a copy of this model policy to you. Presently, because of the patterns and practice investigation of the civil rights of Chicago Police, they're now putting a form of this in place at Chicago Police because of the sexual misconduct that was discovered there. And I think, it's been accepted by national experts that this is one of the reasons why it's so hard to recruit female officers in a male-dominated profession where there's high rates of sexual misconduct. And in the spirit of what we talked about tonight and policy, I'd like you all to read this and then hear Ms. McLean's presentation, and then maybe consider, because it's part of our mission, to offer this national policy, a standalone policy, not incorporated into other parts of the SOP of the police department, but a standalone policy which gives it a lot more strength to implement this policy in our next meeting. So I wanted to add that. And by the way, this policy has been discussed with NACO, who's our umbrella agency, and they they cite NACO in the policy itself. When you read it, it will inform you as how big the problem is, but it's because it's very much related to other, because sexual assault, sexual misconduct is violent. It's very much related to other violent behavior from police officers across the country. So I thought maybe you all would look at it and we would invite her. So my motion is that we formally invite Ms. McLean from Silent No More to give us some local context to the issue of officer-involved sexual misconduct.
Motion on the floor, is there a second?
I'm not going to second.
I'm sorry, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, it's been seconded for the purposes of discussion. Mr. Scott?
We could do a motion if you like. I believe the chair has the authority to set the agenda. If you want to just acknowledge you're going to put it up, whatever you want to do.
Now I'm going to make you culpable. So it's been
That's
moved
acceptable.
and properly seconded. Discussion?
I have something.
I know that was kind of tongue in cheek, but I really meant it. Okay. I appreciate you, though. I appreciate you. Okay.
So
Director
I'm
Fisher.
really in support of what Mr. Nguyen is wanting to bring to the community. At NACO, they had an entire session on investigations for sexual misconduct within police departments. And so it is something that our department does not have within their policy, this particular type of policy. And I think that especially from the allegations that we have heard over the past, that it would be something that we definitely need to at least begin to move forward, trying to get implemented within our own police department. It is a best practice. It is, we know that sexual harassment and sexual misconduct is really prevalent in most police departments across the country. And so I'm looking forward to having Ms. McLean come and talk about that at our next meeting.
Further discussion? Okay. I have one question. What would be the length of the presentation, roughly?
You, Chair, could set the length. I'm sure she could set as long as you're allowed to.
Okay, that I feel comfortable doing. Okay, 15-minute presentation.
So we're going to try to have Ms. McLean at this meeting as well as someone from the Trulio. So we have.
Yeah, we got a lot going here, and then we've got PRRs, which is, again, continues to be primary.
But I think that's it. I think that's the only two things.
Okay. All right, any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Any abstains? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you very much, appreciate that, look forward to it. Any further business? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, have a great night, everybody. Thank you so much.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.